All right, welcome back to another PCBH Corner. I'm super excited. This is a new segment that we're doing within the PCBH Corners, and in partnership with CFHA and Family Systems and Health Journal. Each journal release, we're identifying an article that we want to take a deeper dive in and kind of interview the author, get some background on it. And I'm just really excited for this to be the first one and to be joined by Nick. I'm going to pass over to you, Nick, to kind of do an introduction of who you are and where you're coming from, and then we're going to get into the article that's coming out about supervision needs of novice behavioral health clinicians in integrated primary care settings. But before jumping in with my questions that my mind has, do you want to give an introduction of who you are and where you're at right now?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nick. So currently, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Fun fact, it's also where I got my terminal master's degree. So I am a clinical mental health counselor by training, but got my PhD in counselor education. And during my time there, did quite a bit of work in general hospital settings, specifically in labor delivery and OBGYN units. But then transitioned over to primary care, where we started to develop a more PCBH congruent approach since we found the co-located therapy thing wasn't really working for us.
It was great reading the article, and just as always, man, you do just such great work across the board. And for anybody that's familiar with CFHA or integrated care, I think just in general has seen your work, and it's just really phenomenal. So the first question I have is, I think the obvious one, like why did we do this article? Why did we perform this study? What was kind of the background of being like, hey, we need to look at this a little bit more.
Yeah. So I really think a lot of what the supervision literature has right now is pretty new compared to a lot of like the clinical outcomes. We've kind of cemented ourselves as like PHCs in primary care is very effective. So now we're starting to take a closer look into like the training and the supervision side of it. So how can we prepare folks into these settings? And as I was doing my like the lit review preparing for my dissertation, I realized that a lot of the literature was from the supervisor's perspective, which is incredibly
Hmm.
important. Like we need to know how supervisors function and how we can make sure the supervisors are meeting competencies. And at the same time, there wasn't necessarily that same supervisee or learner perspective. So
Hmm.
really where I wanted to take something like this was looking specifically at what did our learners say that they needed throughout the process.
Hmm.
We had started to get that good foundation of what our supervisors needed to be able to do and how we can best function in primary care as supervisors. But there was still this gap as to like what exactly do our new learners need?
Hmm.
So that a lot of retraining needs to happen. There's a lot of role confusion. There's a lot of new expectations for primary care. So really, this study was about what do our learners need from the horse's mouth itself.
Hmm. Nick, I love that. And my mind has so many different follow-up questions. I know obviously in one of the co-authors, Stacey Obaid, has done a tremendous amount of work within this realm about supervision. And it's such an interesting thing, one within the field, right? Because we don't have like, this is the most the best worst kept secret. I don't know the ways of describing it about, supervision where everybody does supervision, whether you're someone progressing through education, and the most people that are in the mental health field, they'll be supervisors and provide supervision. But we don't know a lot about it from any direction. And I love how you said that a lot of what we talk about is from a supervisor perspective. But this really, it's like, what if we need to look at the supervisee's perspective? I love that that's the approach you took. That's really cool.
I mean, in my head, it kind of like mirrors what it's like providing clinical services. Where like us as the clinician, we can know in theory what's going to be helpful for this
Uh,
person, but unless we actually ask them, we might be hitting a target, but we might be hitting the wrong target.
Well said, Nick. Oh, oh, that gets me excited. That gets me excited in a lot of different ways. I love that. I love that. Okay, okay. So, kind of seeing this kind of gap. And the other thing that I love that you highlight, both within the lit review of the article and then just talking with you as a human, where one there might be this dearth of information about supervision in general, but then you start to think about like PCBH supervision. It's like, oh, buddy, like we're like very, very little to go into it. So walk us through like you saw this gap, you saw this need. What led you to do the methods that you did? Obviously, doing the Delphi study, that you kind of what led you to go that route?
Yeah. So It was a methodology that I was familiar with. So one of
Hmm.
my first empirical studies was the Delphi methodology on integrated care education and what was needed skills and knowledge wise. So I was very familiar with that methodology, and I felt fairly comfortable doing that with the kind of like the respect and the credence that it deserved. And I
Hmm.
also know that like inherently that methodology looks at making subjective experiences more objective through
Hmm.
statistical analysis. Granted, they're fairly basic statistical analyses, but it allows for out like the lived experience of that like expert panelist to really become objective through a series of like consensus driven surveys so that by the end, sorry, let me start. Um, at the start of it, we had just like 114 different like broad statements about what all
Yeah.
of the folks said they needed. But then by the end, we narrowed it down to like 68
Yes.
specific things that through like multiple rounds of just like, hey, we're going to touch base. Is this accurate based on your experience? So at the end of that process, we just had 68 statements that folks across the board said, yes, I wish I had this, or more
Hmm.
folks moving forward need this in supervision.
Let me ask you this: for people that might not be familiar with, Delphi, one of the things that's really interesting about Delphi studies is that they are seeming like they're becoming more popular. Obviously, been around for a while, but definitely within these areas that we might not have a lot of research and different things. Anything you would want to say to people watching this? And one of the benefits, I think, of us doing these type of corners and highlighting that is that we know family systems of health and CFHA, it's a mixture of different people, from people like yourself working in academia, doing research, from people that are full-blown clinicians. And I think
Mhm.
one of the really awesome things about this type of research is that it's pragmatic, it's useful. There's different ways of going about it. So anything that you kind of think about, just encouragement for people, whether you're academics or clinicians, even using this methodology moving forward. Why would people use this? And anything that you would say? I know that's not the greatest question that we have, but yeah, just your experience with using this type of methodology. Where's your mind go?
Where my mind heads to go tends to go with something like this is I find that this is a methodology that's great for when we know things in theory, but not in actual
Mm.
practice. So it allows
Ah.
us to kind of like bring what we anticipate the thoughts are about a specific topic like integrated care training or primary care supervision and say, hey, folks who are experts in the field specific to this thing, what do you think? And it really
Mm.
allows us to like you said, very pragmatically lay out here are the thoughts of the folks that really know their stuff. Here are the thoughts of
Mm.
the folks that say like this is what we need to be doing so that it provides like a good direction moving forward. The way that I hope that something like this starts is like it's literally like the starting point or the starting
Yes.
in a race where it's like now we have a good direction. Now other folks can take it and run with it.
I love that. I love this being like the first ripple for it to really start. I love how you said, like, hey, in theory, we kind of have an idea or an understanding. We think this might be the thing. It's like, let's get some, that's, research. It's always amazing, right? About how much like what we think we know that's actually not true, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so let me ask you this. So within the participants that we
Mhm.
did, anything that you wanted to provide, what it was a total of 16 that were invited, 12.
Mhm.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, was it 16? Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you go about recruitment? How did you go about identifying? Yeah, how did you reach out to these individuals?
Uh, trial and error mostly. But I specifically go through like CFHA. I reached out to specific folks that I knew were actively supervising folks.
Hmm.
Since my like the sample for this study was really focused on learners, either in their master's or their doctoral or like early stages of their postdoc, I needed to touch base with the supervisors to find these folks. Um,
Hmm.
so I did a lot of like concerted recruitment through supervisors and through CFHA and some other avenues like other listservs. But really, a lot of my participants came from the supervisors themselves saying like, "Hey, I'm supervising these folks. They meet your criteria of being learners. They're receiving supervision at least once a
Hmm.
week or in primary care. I hear their thoughts essentially."
Awesome. That's really cool. So reaching out to people that were doing it and then obviously sending
Mhm.
it out as you did recruit. Was it tough to recruit?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think for a methodology like this, where like the expectation is it's not just a one and done, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
over like 3 or 4 months or a few surveys. Luckily, I was able to get like a grant through the Southern Association of Counselor Education and Supervision, so I was able to compensate folks for their time. But recruitment for anything that is more than a single survey or more than just like a one and done tends to be a little challenging. But I will give like full props and thanks and appreciation for the participants since all 12 of them came back each time, which is almost unheard of.
So go through that process, like you just said. Like, so, as people are watching this and they're trying to figure out like the methodology and how to do this. So, as you said, like this isn't a one and done, right? Like Delphi, they're not one and dones. They're multiple different processes through it. So walk us through that initial, like, hey, you get a survey, and then what happens after that?
Yeah, so I essentially in the informed consent, I was like, hey, listen, I know that you're going to hear from me a few times these next few months. Just bear with me. And in the end, I promise I will give you this $50 Amazon gift card. But essentially, the process was like I would initially reach out to folks. They would confirm their interest. They would confirm inclusion criteria. I would reach out with that initial survey. I would send a thank you note afterwards saying like, hey, I'll be in touch within like 2 months
Hmm.
on the lookout and I'll send some reminders. So one of the things that I was very intentional about, specifically for the Delphi methodology, was following up very intentionally, just with those gentle reminders of like, hey, a deadline's coming up. If there's anything that I
Hmm.
can do to extend the deadline, any flexibility, please let me know. So really doing what I can to like meet the participants where they're at, since they are ultimately dedicating their time, their energy to something like this. It's gonna hopefully impact the field in a meaningful way.
Hmm. So that initial round, as you said, kind of really just trying to gather, and I love how you went through this. Like, and as you said, what would the initial, how many response, 100 and what? 100.
140.
Yeah, and so really that first initial response, like gathering everything. It's like we're not putting limits on this. I want to just see, will then as we look through it, look for themes and through patterns, when it down to 68. And once you got to the 68, and then that's when sending back out to the same group, be like, hey, now I need you to kind of say, like, is this a part? Is this something that we have consensus about?
Absolutely. Like that first round is really conceptualized as like the brainstorming round, where
Cool.
folks will give
Cool.
specific items. I chose to just like a single open-ended question with like 50 open-ended responses. Say like, hey, give me any and all thoughts that you have. Doesn't matter if they're fully fleshed or if they're like half-baked. I'll take
Mhm.
them all. So then at that point, we take those 114 and we funnel them down into a smaller number by condensing and combining the ones that are thematically similar. And at that point, we send another survey out to say, hey, here are the initial statements based on your initial thoughts. Do you agree or do you disagree? If folks agreed, by and large, hey, great, it's a statement, we're going to keep it. But if folks disagreed, we provided them with a very intentional space to say, like, what needs to be different about.
Ooh, I like that.
So I think at the end of round two, where we got that like initial consensus on the initial statements, a vast majority of the items ended up passing through
Ah.
agreement. But a few did need to get modified here and there. And so we took their feedback based on their initial statements to modify those statements even further. And then we got the final 68 and then like two that didn't achieve consensus at the end.
Now, out of the 68 that we had, what surprised you? Like, did anything kind of really stick out? It's like, oh man, again, this is why we do this. Is like, I don't know if I would have thought about that. That's a surprise. What stood out to you?
I think what one of the things that was the most surprising is how many needs they had specifically of how the supervisor presented themselves.
Hmm.
So they needed their supervisors to be very flexible. They needed them to also like attend to the administrative requirements. Or like we recognize in PCBH we're going to get pulled into sessions, we're going to need to reschedule. And if we do, let's circle back to it regardless because for a lot of our folks that are especially in master's and doctoral, there are those like required number of hours of clinical supervision per week. So
Hmm.
folks said like I love the flexibility and I need the structure at the same time.
Yeah,
Um,
and I loved how, some of the highest consensus ones, yes, technical and relational, right? Like the things that we know come up, I wrote down like trust, openness, psychological safety, these things that like are kind of hallmarks of, just, therapy and definitely we would want them to be hallmarks of supervision. They still existed even within the context of primary care behavioral health.
Absolutely. And one of the most like interesting and also like a little disheartening things that I saw within the lit review is that there were really only like two studies that looked at supervisee or learner experiences in primary care, and both said that supervision was unsatisfactory. And part of
Oh,
the reason was because that there wasn't that relational piece to it. The
ugh.
relational piece wasn't as attended to. So it both came as a surprise at how much they said the relational piece was important, but it also didn't come as a surprise because, supervision is inherently like therapeutic in a sense. It's inherently relational,
Hmm.
like the work that we do as clinicians.
It's so fascinating, and this is something, being a part of a training program, we debate constantly about, all the different things that we try to do because there's a lot to learn, right? There's a lot to know in primary care, as point out, in integrated behavioral health. There's just a lot that the person has to know, and yet still we can't sacrifice the foundational aspects of creating a context where people can lean in and ask
Mhm.
questions, be okay to fail. Like that really showed up in what the supervisees were requesting.
Mhm. 100%. Because I can't tell you how many times, like on my end as a supervisor, like as a clinician, sometimes we make mistakes. We run into things a little too fast. We take a jackhammer to the door instead of just
Hmm.
knocking. I think every supervisor out there has done a similar thing in supervision, where instead of attending to the relationship, they jump into a supervisory intervention or rush to teach someone something because they notice something that's missing. And at the same time, if we can't attend to like that human emotion or the very
Hmm.
natural thought that comes up in this moment, we're likely missing a very important part of personal and professional development for our supervisee.
Hmm. Well said. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. So say you're a supervisor reading this article, working in integrated behavioral health, maybe working in primary care behavioral health and stuff. What would you say are the biggest takeaways? What would you say from a supervisor perspective? What would you say are the biggest ta takeaways from the findings?
Yeah. I'd say first and foremost, it's very mindful of how I show up in these settings.
Hmm.
While
Hmm.
everything is so fast-paced in primary care, it can be a little chaotic. There's a lot of like interruptions happening. I need to slow down as a supervisor so that I can still attend to the human being in front of me who's adapting to this new environment, who's still in the learning process. So as a supervisor, where my head goes is like, slow down. Not
Hmm.
everything needs to be addressed right now. Um, and
I
I,
like
yes,
that. Yeah, I love that. And I'll pass back over where your mind was going. I love that, like that key take, like slow down. And almost again, not surprisingly, what we were saying even a little bit more about, who would have thought maybe we should ask our supervisees what they want out of supervision, similar to us asking patients what do they want out of treatment. I love that same thing that we tell people all the time clinically. It's like, hey, slow down. Like slow down a little bit. And I love that that also seems to range true for supervision. Slow down.
yeah. And I think as a part of that, where my mind went is like what I as like a researcher hope that folks take away from this is like here's essentially like a framework for how we can start to conceptualize supervision in primary care. And it
Hmm.
doesn't need to be like the thing you follow to a T. And if it can help guide the process every now and then, if it can serve as an occasional compass that you turn out or take out from time to time, awesome. Because there are
Hmm.
certain things that we do need to attend to very early on, like that relationship piece. We need to establish that trust very early on, compared to we can maybe wait to talk about CBT for chronic pain in primary care until a few weeks down the line. That's
Oh yeah.
probably not priority number one. Priority number one is probably establishing that psychological safety, helping folks feel comfortable within a new primary care setting, especially if they've only been in specialty mental health. Helping folks get acquainted with the EMR and what the warm
Hmm.
handoff process looks like.
Hmm. What do you think, again, and this is another reason why I really love the research that you did. Like there was just a lot of pragmatic suggestions and things that people could apply. What do you think pragmatically, because we talk about these things like psychological safety and trust and different things. How would, based on the responses, based on, hearing from the supervisees, how should supervisors build that? What should they do? And you kind of call attention to some of those already, but what suggestions would you give for supervisors to do to try to really build up that trust and that psychological safety?
I honestly, I think shadowing is one of the best things
Hmm.
folks could do.
Hmm.
Like, watch me for a day. See how I succeed. See how I mess up from time to time. See how I manage the small mistakes that I might make throughout a day. Just because as a clinician, we make mistakes all the time, whether big or small. It's not necessarily about the mistake we made, it's about how we respond to that mistake. So if our supervisees can see us in a very human moment clinically, I find that that really helps to facilitate that safety. I'm also a big fan as a supervisor, like setting expectations early.
Hmm.
I'll communicate like, here's what I expect from you, but what do you expect from me? this is a two-way street. It's reasonable for you to desire things from me as a supervisor. What are those things and how can we like meet in the middle for those? So having a very like transparent conversation about what are your learning goals? What do you need to see from me? Here's how I'll meet
Hmm.
it. What am I missing based on what you need?
Bridge and I, we were just given a training last week, and we were highlighting the importance of expectations, where you know, and we were talking about it more from like an employee to an employer standpoint, but I think this is like generalizable there as well, where it's like people, the expectations are a good thing to guide. Like, I need to know as a as a trainee or something, like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? And like having those conversations, and then also the reverse direction of like from the supervisor being understanding like what do I need to have as far as expectations to meet the supervisor's needs. I was trying to real quick. I have so many things like highlighted and stuff with it, the article, but I love what you said about supervisors being shadowed and being kind of open about their own struggles or mistakes, about how that ripples out to create a context of psychological safety. Now, you talked about this a little bit, and I know there's been other articles about this. What would you say, and let me know if this is beyond, like, it's like, I don't know yet about what the research says. One of the things always come up about supervision within primary care, it's like should or must or do we require the supervisor to either A, be working in primary care, or two, to have a training specifically in primary care. We know a lot of places that it's like, hey, we do a practicum rotation or an internship, but the person supervising them has had very little, if any, experience working in primary care. What do you feel like your research has shown within that? Like, hey, should they be, if you're doing supervision within this, like you should be working in primary care, at the very least, have a background in it? Where's your mind go?
I I'm gonna take this from like a very like pragmatic perspective, just from what like the supervisees said
Yeah,
that
yeah,
yeah. At the
yeah.
some sort of background so you can conceptualize how behavioral health practice looks like in primary care, what the function and goals of primary care are, how the context of practice specifically looks different, especially if you are the primary supervisor, like at a clinic or at a
Hmm.
site. It might be challenging to provide the context-based supervision necessary for someone in
Hmm.
primary care if you don't know the context itself. But
Hmm.
I think there's an argument for like university-based supervision if supervisors don't have that primary care experience. That's okay. Other perspectives can be beneficial because you know what, our outpatient peers and colleagues could have great perspectives that could be beneficial for primary care.
Hmm.
And if you were the only supervisor that this person has, or if you are specifically associated with like their site for like a practicum or internship placement, I tend to be of the opinion based on the the expert panelists that I had in my study saying that, yeah, we need a supervisor who has experience in primary care. We need a supervisor that can explain what primary care is and how
Hmm.
behavioral health fits into it. I think having that background and knowledge and experience is fairly important, especially if you were like the clinical supervisor rather than like a university-based one, if that makes sense.
100%. And my mind goes to kind of one of the things that we talked about, the most, what was common about that trust and that psychological safety. I love how you framed that. It's like, hey, the supervisor being open about their struggles and stuff. And if you haven't worked in primary care, that's almost like an impossible thing to discuss, because how can I be open about struggling within this context if I've never actually been in that context?
And like honestly, what one of the most like salient like real world examples that I can think of is like I was supervising folks in primary care, and a university-based supervisor said, "Well, why don't you do the SKID 5 to diagnose in primary care?" I'm like, "With what time?
Yeah.
We got 15 minutes to do a really good assessment, a few minutes afterwards to do a really good contextual intervention. Where is the time to do the whole SKID 5?"
Interesting.
Like that example always like stands out to me because like from this university supervisor's perspective, like this is the best practice. And
Right.
absolutely, like for an outpatient mental health provider, definitely I would probably recommend doing a SKID 5 if we want to come to a diagnostic conclusion. And at the same time, they didn't necessarily have the mindset or the perspective of primary care and how the diagnosis isn't always the most important thing. Sometimes the contextual based assessment is the most important thing because we can do it quickly and effectively. And then we can do like a big eye or a small eye single session intervention that really impacts them in the here and now compared to a 50-minute diagnostic instrument that gives us a diagnosis at the end of the day.
Dude, it gets me hyped. It gets me hyped. Okay. Dude, you've been doing awesome with this, man. I'm so excited. We were pumped about doing this, and I'm glad you're the first one that has just been a lot of fun. So the last two questions that I have for you, and you talk about this a little bit, obviously, at the end of the article. What do you think next steps are going to be from this? What are you taking forward? What is you and maybe your team and stuff like? What's the next steps that you're doing after the initial findings that you have?
Yeah. So I know this study specifically was integrated primary care as a whole. While a lot of our participants and our expert panelists practice from that PCBH perspective, the chances are like there's probably very different needs between someone that's in a PCBH setting versus a COCM setting versus a pump.
Ah, great point.
So I think more targeted research on like what are the needs for someone in PCBH versus COCM versus co-located versus blended PCBH and COCM is going to be pretty necessary. Um, and I'm going to take a page out of Stacey Obide's book and talk about like competency-based supervision. Like we need additional information on like how we can track and measure supervisee growth and learner growth as they go through the primary care-based process. And not just tracking their growth broadly, but like PCBH specific growth. Like how are they functioning and growing as a BHC compared to as a mental health clinician?
My mind is having this moment right now, just of a lot of gratitude for you and obviously Stacy, because the, one of the things that we always talk about whenever we're consulting or we're training, we always say, hey, the most important thing that anybody could do is the clinician just doing good work, doing good clinical work. That's going to be the best seller. That's going to be the thing that causes integrated care to be uptaken. And if we're looking at it from a trainee perspective, if that is, say that, that assumption becomes true, that it really shows the importance of competence-based supervision to make sure that we're training people to do good clinical work, to give something that's going to be useful with them in that primary care context.
Yeah. And I think related to that, something that I didn't mention, but you like what you had said, like triggered that thought in my mind is like not just competency-based supervision for our learners, but competency-based supervision for our supervisors.
Hell yeah.
How are we training our supervisors to do things effectively? Because we have the competencies. Stacey Obide and Brian Bales did a PCBH competencies study on supervisors. How do we know if our supervisors are actually meeting it? How do we know if the supervisor training is even available? Um, I know supervision training itself can be sparse from time to time. So like are we even training our supervisors to be effective supervisors, not just like broadly within the mental health sphere, but specifically within primary care?
Yet again, it goes back to that greatest irony, right? Everybody does supervision, everybody was a supervisee. We got nothing about like, hey, do this, don't do that. Like basically what we do, right, is that we say, hey, I know how my supervisors were. I like this, I don't like that. So that's how I'm going to be as a supervisor versus, again, like moving towards a competency-based thing, especially the importance of that not only broadly throughout the field, but definitely within primary care and any type of integrated behavioral health, because there's different behaviors, different skill sets that need to be developed.
Absolutely.
Dude, that's cool. That's cool. Okay. Last question. We always like to end these corners with is today, what is bringing you joy from your work? What's getting you hyped? What's bringing you joy from just what you get to do?
Yeah, so I'm supervising one of our behavioral health clinicians that's in like a dual setting here at PCOM. So they're in our outpatient mental health clinic called the Center for Brief Therapy, and they're doing some of their family medicine work downstairs in our integrated clinic. So this week is kind of like our last week of checking in for their master's level practicum experience. It's kind of like that culmination of like, okay, this is the first time you've ever done clinical work.
Hmm.
This is the culmination of it. How did it feel? How did it go? What do you want to do moving forward? So I know that's something that's bringing me quite a bit of joy, but uh, this week is also the last week of our classes for the fall term. So our first year students just finished their first term of grad school, which is always comes with a lot of emotions for us as like faculty, but also our students. And I also get to check in with like the rest of my practicum students that are in outpatient mental health clinics like across Southeast Pennsylvania to just kind of see like, hey, you just did your first like 16 weeks of clinical work in your life. How does this feel as a career? How does this feel as a person? So that's always something that gets me very excited at the end of the term, and something I'm very much looking forward to today and later this week.
Let's go, man. That got me hyped. That got me hyped. Well, again, man, I cannot overstate how much it was a joy reading the article. For people watching this, that if you're a supervisor, and I would say even broadly, and let me know, Nick, if you agree with this, I would say for sure, if you're a supervisor working with people that are supervisees and their training years and stuff, and I would also say this is relevant for people that are leading programs and directors in programs and maybe welcoming new BHCs to the team where you might not be providing formal supervision, but you're definitely going to be doing onboarding and doing
Mhm.
training throughout. This is a must read that provides pragmatic kind of insights from the supervisee's perspective about what they're hoping for and highlighting those core components that we know again, trust, openness, psychological safety. It just was such a joy to read. The other thing I love that you said is that highlighting the importance of supervision. The one thing that we'll include in this link, Stacy has done a great course through CFHA about PCBH supervision and trying to get more standardization with that. But man, I just appreciate it. Now, I wish that you were on the western side of the state. I wish you were more in Pittsburgh. As far as born and raised, I'll give the pass that it was Bridge and I. We debate. It's like we're gonna have someone from Philadelphia be the first one for this. But dude, any final thoughts? Anything last that your mind goes to right now?
Oh, I think it's really just like mostly like gratitude, not just to like you and Bridget for all the work that you've done here, but also inviting me. But I do also want to specifically say thank you to like, since this was my dissertation, like I did not do this in a silo. There was a whole team of folks
Hmm.
behind me, like my dissertation chair, Gusha Kemer, as well as like Stacy Obaid. I can't thank her enough because the way that Stacy ended up on my dissertation committee is I just like reached out to her on LinkedIn and was like, "Hey, you interested?" And she just responded to some random guy reaching out on LinkedIn, and from there, like she has been such an incredible help. So I can't say enough about those two specifically.
Nick, I'm so glad that you said that. And I think it's another plug for, one, the importance of like reach out to people, right? Like CFHA and just the integrated care, it's a small community. It's a very connected community and people want to help other people. And I also love that you highlight it's like it's a team, right? Like even doing any type of research or, working in clinic, supervise, it's a team approach. I love that you highlighted that.
Yeah, I would not have survived this process without every single person who is on that on that manuscript with me there.
Well, Nick, you're doing phenomenal work. We're excited to read the next things that you promote, but definitely, as we said, be look on the lookout for supervision needs of novice behavioral health clinicians and integrated primary care settings that will be out in the family systems and health. And just really grateful for all the support and everything that you're doing, dude.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all.
All right, man. Take care.